Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's Rutgers Business School Virtual Lunch and Learn webinar. I'd like to thank Dr. Arash Azadegan for joining us today. Arash focuses his research on supply chain disruptions, response and recovery from disruptions, and interorganizational creativity and innovation. He manages the Supply Chain Disruption Research Laboratory at the Center for Supply Chain Management here at Rutgers Business School. Arash's work has been published in a number of the most prestigious journals on operations, production, supply chain, research and development, and purchasing. He's currently working on several projects related to disruption recovery and the response management practices of supply chains. As a means of grounding his research in what is most useful for practitioners, Arash draws on more than 10 years of industry experience with Fortune 500 companies such as Ford Motor Company, Quaker Oats, Ralston Purina, and Fortune Brands, who happen to be the makers of the Master Lock. He is an active member of the Decision Sciences Institute and the treasurer of the Academy of Management Operations Management Division. Arash also teaches in the Mini MBA Digital Supply Chain Management, which is part of RBS's executive education portfolio of programs. And from here, I'm going to let you take it away, Arash.
Thank you, Margaret. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the introduction. It's like I was mentioning to you in the passing, it is a wonderful opportunity to work with you particular, and of course the Rutgers Business School Executive Education Program. It's exciting to be here, and this is a topic, as you can imagine, that folks mention to me for that it is timely, and I have a comment about that. But let me just put a clarifier. I am no longer the treasurer. I used to be the treasurer at the Academy of Management, but somehow I don't know if I was very good with money. No, actually, I had to step down for other purposes. Nevertheless, but I am, of course, involved with the Academy quite readily. We can talk about that separately. Regarding the topic at hand today, actually, we're going to talk about business continuity, and frankly, I'm going to talk about perhaps a term that has been used and leveraged, but not quite well understood, and that is resilience. So as we go through the process, you'll see me shifting in that direction, simply because I had the opportunity to be the guest lecturer. I'm sorry, a guest editor for a new issue, a special issue that came out in the Journal of Supply Chain Management, one of our good journals. They said, hey, can you do this? So myself and Kevin Dooley, who's out of Arizona State University, put together a group of quote unquote well-regarded knowledge people. I don't like the term expert. There's no such thing as an expert, but I guess, we've all been around to know a little bit of this and that about the topic. So anyway, I'll mention the Journal of Supply Chain Management special issue, and is really a forward-looking issue about dealing with mega disruptions and how firms should be focusing. So today's topic is really geared towards that, and instead of simply business continuity, which some of you might be familiar with. My good friend Ralph Petty is here. Thanks for being here. And others, which are certainly are more knowledgeable regarding business continuity. So we're going to get into resilience and forms of resilience, and I'll mention what why we decided to go about this way. But this is essentially a summary version of what Kevin and I put together as a way forward. So micro level resilience, macro level resilience, and then what we consider as meso level resilience, missing from practice. And I'll share some industry practices and key differentiators among them. As Margaret suggested, you can send them at any time, your questions, and as they come to mind. I'd like to keep things fresh. I know we're kind of restricted, but just like the executive MBA program that we have here at Rutgers, it's much more engaging. In fact, dare I say, I miss it a lot in the ability to, let me see, I hope this is not going to be problematic down the road, uh, truncating the bottom. We'll see. There, that might help a little bit. Anyway, so yeah, feel free to put in your questions. And again, the purpose of this is not necessarily to provide you with, our conceptual model, rather, how does it apply, right? And that's why it is being offered as an executive education program. Let's go back. Let's go back to talk about business continuity and what it means, right? Business continuity, as many of you probably know, is the total plan for prevention, continuance, and restoration. So what I like about business continuity is that it combines what's considered as risk management and resilience or response to a disruption. Business continuity is the umbrella. Now, this framework is probably not well known. I introduced this framework a couple of years ago, and we have a couple of other papers. So I've got a total of 3 papers in academic journals and a couple of other ones that are coming through. And so this is kind of the way I'd like to frame business continuity, right? The baselines are the 3 pillars of business impact analysis, response and recovery plan, which I call it as R2, and then institutionalization. Again, I'm going to move fast through this, right? Because these are all available in textbooks. But again, if you feel like I can be of further assistance in many in this area, feel free to email me. So on the left-hand side, we have BIA, or business impact analysis. What does that necessarily mean? That essentially combines the type of risks that we are exposed to, we meaning an organization in particular, if that's our unit of analysis, or a supply chain, if that's our unit of analysis. Now, why do I say that? Back in the old days, meaning 20 years ago, although you can say the old days is BC, before COVID. Nevertheless, I'm talking about the old days of 20 years ago. We essentially had a series of risks that were known, but nevertheless, we would have to list those out. So that's hazard assessment. How do we do risk assessment? We essentially identify any and all of the risks that are that an organization is exposed to. Back in the old days, the risks were focused on the firm itself. Today's world means that a group of organizations, the value chain, work together to provide a service or value to the end consumer. And so when we do business impact analysis, it is necessary to consider the entire supply chain. So the unit of analysis, or more from a managerial standpoint, the unit of competition is changed over the past several years to be more about the supply chain. No organization is an island, and without friends, meaning suppliers and customers downstream, they're not going to be able to survive. Anyway, so business impact analysis needs to focus on risk. That risk is internal, but also the risks associated with suppliers and the type of risks that our suppliers are also affected by. Now, so that's essentially the hazard assessment. The second part of this that's important is to know how much preparedness we already have embedded in the system. Sometimes that is called inherent resilience, right? That is a resilience or the ability to ward off risks or their impact without necessarily having to work hard. Just because it's fresh in our minds, this is the equivalent of a young person catching the virus as opposed to an older person catching the virus. He or she, the younger one, didn't have to do anything, right? And the older, over 75, despite the fact that they were very careful, right, they could be exposed to the virus. And so that's the preparedness level that I consider as inherent within the organization and not having to work hard on it. Once I know what the risks are, how much preparedness I already have embedded in the system for various reasons, then I can actually go ahead and identify what else I need to do to be better prepared, right? What are some examples of industry level or organizational level embedded preparedness? Well, if I have safety stock, just because demand of my product is up and down, right? I have a new product, right? I have no idea how well it's going to sell or whether it's just going to sit on the shelf, right? So I actually buffer some inventory in there. Well, that buffer inventory can also be beneficial if for whatever reason a disruption, or what we consider now as mega disruption, it comes to fruition. So that's one. And I'll talk about what I mean by mega disruption in just a second. Then we have what's considered response and recovery, or R2, response structure and objectives. How do we respond in terms of organizational reporting and responsibilities and objectives? Some of you are likely familiar with this. This goes back to recovery RTO, a recovery time objective, RPO, recovery point objective, and other specific numericized objectives that we have. Time objectives, point objectives, and overall recovery time can be quite subjective, meaning that it depends on the particular disruption. Remember, we identified the hazards already, right? So if I have a cyber hack, perhaps that my recovery times are different between different functions. If I have a pandemic, they're going to be different. If I have a product recall, then perhaps that's different. All of these have to be considered as part of the hazard assessment and my recovery and response plan. The last part, the last column, the third column, is fascinatingly obvious and fascinatingly underutilized, right? And that's what I call institutionalization. And that is developing practices that allow folks to be ready. It's no different than, remember when we did fire drills at middle school and high school? I'm assuming nobody's still here. But nevertheless, all right, remember when we did that, stop, roll, whatever it was called, stop, drop, roll, right? And so those were the elements that we used to do for particular types of risks and potential events. Unfortunately, we don't see that much happening in organization. Nor are they practiced adequately, right? When we have a fire drill, that was a big deal. Everybody was unhappy about it, but it goes beyond fire drills. I don't know if there's a lot of fire issues going on. Risks that really affect an organization are different these days, right? Right after 9/11, folks were very concerned about and terrorism. And oftentimes, the minute a product recall occurs, folks become very concerned about contamination from upstream and everything else. And so they do actual practices about how to quarantine, so to speak, the particular batch or how we react. Practices include, tabletop exercises, simulation, right, and other ways of just putting placing the folks into perspective of how they would react in these circumstances. And if it's not obvious, I will tell you, it's not uncommon for folks to act completely different when they are faced with a situation, as opposed to when they think they would be facing it. So putting them in the bubble, that would be quite realistic. In that regard helps. And oftentimes through peer pressure that happens. So practices in groups really help. And then there's enforcement. And enforcement is more or less just making sure that everyone is in compliance and has done routine testing, right? Just like we have to do regulatory training on a yearly basis. So moving on to the next step, let me give you some examples of that are particular to COVID in terms of response. Now, obviously, I have an ulterior motive in bringing these up, but I just want you to kind of reflect on how these are different than the type of response that we had seen previously, or perhaps that we would expect. Let me see if I can actually read through what was written. I mean, it's down here, but you don't have to read it. And I have a different transcript for it anyway. On the left-hand side, we have this healthcare coalition called COVID-19 Healthcare Coalition. Now, from the surface, it doesn't mean anything. It's just basically your pure vanilla coalition among healthcare organizations. Not so, you say. Healthcare Coalition was a private sector-led response effort aiming to preserve the health and delivery system here in the United States through state-of-the-art information technology, manufacturing, health, and supply chain capabilities. Okay, big deal, right? But listen to who was involved. We had the Mayo Clinic, Intermountain Healthcare, which is essentially a insurance and network of hospitals, AWS, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, and LabCorp. So, okay, so you say, why in the heck would these guys, in the midst of a pandemic, be trying to do something together? Why would AWS or Microsoft be involved, and why would LabCorp, frankly, right, start to do a coalition? Because if you remember, LabCorp was very, very busy just getting the tests done, and they were under pressure to get those faster, right? Remember a few months ago when they were like, oh, well, 7 days, who's going to really benefit from a 7-day turnaround on tests? It's too late already. Anyway, so this coalition actually created a series of initiatives to identify, novel methods of how to handle. So they came up with ways of sterilizing and reusing N95 masks, for instance. They actually did some testing on use of telehealth and clinical therapeutics, right? And so this combination of coming together in a group that is somewhat remote from one another was surprising. Here's another one on the right-hand side, and that is Pan-European Privacy Preserving Proximity Tracing. Now, say that 5 times fast. PEPPPT Coalition was, again, also a private sector-led response effort, and it included a whole bunch of different cell phone manufacturers, software manufacturers, IT organizations, and they were to develop a smartphone proximity tracing tools. You say, well, big deal. Everybody's doing that. Countries are based on that, right? But this one was supposed to be doing it on a way through Bluetooth, through a Bluetooth handshake, while maintaining European privacy laws. That's the big trade-off, right? People here in our country simply are, reluctant to accept contact tracing, right? Becomes very difficult because of privacy laws. Well, guess what? Multiply that by 2, the issue is there in Europe. So PEPPT was essentially focusing on that by having this coalition. So both of these are cross-sector, cross-border, cross-discipline coalitions, and that's what we consider meso-level supply chain, supply network. And it's the resilience strategy that we have yet to truly explore in the industry or overall. So let's go talk about what do we mean about this mid-level, meso-level. Let's talk about micro-level resilience, and this essentially is mentions a little bit about inherent resilience, which is basically what's built in your a very strong muscled individual can probably fight the bear off, right? I personally am going to try and run as fast as I can, right? And hopefully the bear will catch my dog first. I'm sorry, no, hopefully he won't catch anything, but right, hopefully I'll survive it. But so inherent resilience is essentially the ability to ward off disruptions without necessarily having to work hard. There is anticipatory resilience, and this is what we all do, right? We wear our seatbelt, right? We buy cars with airbags. We lock our doors, and these are all preventative measures in anticipation of something wrong happening. So, and the ability of a system, community, or society that is exposed to hazard to resist, absorb, and accommodate, adapt to transform and recover from the effect of a hazard. That's essentially what the United Nations considers as a definition for resilience. The problem is that's pretty broad and it's very, very, dare I say, vague. So I've broken it down to actually 3 types of resilience. Both of these are prior to the event occurring. So inherent resilience on the supply chain level, it is about supply chain integration. You say, well, what is that? Well, the minute I'm able to talk to my counterparts in suppliers and suppliers or downstream, sharing of information, that allows me to know what's going on. And essentially, we couldn't consider that integration. It's not just sharing of information, it's the ability to talk to one another. And what are examples of that is essentially when Nokia is able to call up their upstream chip manufacturer and find out that the supplier actually had a fire in their facility and prepare accordingly, right? Another one is what we call postponement, right? If you're not familiar with the term postponement, it is a supply chain term, and I'm offering you a little teaser here and there. You can look it up online or email me. I'd be happy to talk more about it. But postponement is the ability to avoid customization until the last minute or as far close to the customer as possible. Meaning what? If you remember the company Benetton, they made sweaters, which is wonderfully appealing today and tomorrow as we get massive storm coming in, right? But what Benetton did was avoid, they would make all of their sweaters of the same color. But the yarn that they would use was quite color absorbent, and they were able to change the color very quickly depending on what the customers needed, right? So you make plain vanilla, and then you postpone the customization towards the end, and that allows you to meet demand. Well, from a risk standpoint, that also becomes quite important because I'm keeping things as commoditized as possible until I need to customize them. And that obviously helps me with stock, with inventory, with demand management, etc. And then, but these are all essentially inherent resilience. Why? Because we don't implement these for the purpose of risk management. We do supply chain integrations because it's the right thing to do. We want to know what the demand is and adjust for it. But then if there's a hurricane coming, we can use that. We use postponement because it saves a lot of money and effort. And then, of course, if I have a lot of money in the bank, then that also allows me to avoid when bad things happen, when there's disruptions. If I have a lot of money in the bank, just put in there, I'm probably able to survive a major downturn, right? If my friend, for instance, has $80,000 or $100,000 in debt, I don't know if he or she is able to really do as well, right? So these are inherent resilience that we can do. But putting money in the bank isn't necessarily for the purpose of risk management. It could be just simply buying habits of the individual. Then we have anticipatory resilience, right? And that is the third one. And anticipatory resilience is, again, what we do in terms of safety stock, multiple sourcing, and investment in supply chain visibility. I won't go through that because it's somewhat redundant. And I can carry on going through this. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of skip through these. You have the slides and they're fairly straightforward in terms of what safety stock does for us. Keep in mind that safety stock can be done across many tiers or many points within the supply chain. And so we also invest in supply chain visibility, which is a big deal. Often firms don't necessarily invest in supply chain visibility simply because it can be costly. But as we move forward, we recognize the importance of knowing what is going on in the supply chain. Let me tell you just one pointer. What is visibility? Is my ability to see what's upstream and what's downstream, knowing how much inventory there is and how my suppliers are doing. Unfortunately, visibility drops significantly. 90% of Fortune 500 companies lose 100% of their visibility at tier one of their supply chain. What does that mean? That means most of them have no clue how bad or how good their tier two suppliers are doing, which is again upstream. And so there are other ways for me to build resilience through supply chain process. I can standardize materials and parts. If I use the same parts for everything, if I have people that can be interchangeably used, better training, and if I have plants or branches of a bank, right? Hospitals. This is not service or operations or production differentiating for any kind of an operation. As long as I have some standardization across, McDonaldization is a great way to enhance your resilience. Intel does the same thing. Intel has a term called copy exactly. All of their facilities are essentially built in as close as possible to one another and interchangeably use and build their chips. So again, standardized operations of material and standardized processes. And so there are other factors that can be used, reducing part variability, reduce the number of components, which is also called a simplification. Simplification also has its own green benefits, but if I'm able to use less parts in manufacturing a product that is that has the same value, that's a wonderful thing, right? And I digress a little bit, but this is worthwhile. The first thing I remember from Steve Jobs and his innovative approach wasn't Mac. I wasn't a big Mac fan, but the iPod was amazingly impressive, right? Circle and a button inside, and you could do anything you wanted with that circle and a button inside. Fascinatingly simple, fascinatingly elegant, and from a manufacturing standpoint, fascinatingly straightforward to make. Now, the detail was in the back, but from a customer and first glance, that was important. And so those are resilience through supply chain processes. And so that's essentially what firms have been doing. Remember, all of the stuff that I just said applies to the organization or perhaps to their supply chain, right? This is home. This is the neighborhood. This is what we do as friends among each other. Me, my suppliers, my BFFs, right? And so that's what we call micro-level resilience. And so the issue that we found is micro-level resilience really had shortcomings and limitations, right? Because I got sick, my friends got sick, and I don't mean sick proverbially, right? Sick meaning from a production standpoint, I came short. And so did my suppliers, and so did my consumers. So COVID, and this is a side, you can put this as a footnote in your mind as we go through this lecture. What was unique about COVID? COVID-19 taught us about a double-edged sword disruption, right? A two-prong disruption, right? It's a scorpion. Why? Because typically so far, business continuity managers, resilience managers, operations managers, risk managers, we were so used to having one type of disruption affecting us on one side of the entire supply chain. There was either a product recall that was the source And that product recall was because there's contamination, right? There was lead paint in somewhere that wasn't supposed to be, right? Or there's a hurricane. Okay, that hurricane affected my supplier. There was a flood in Thailand, so all my chips being delivered from Thailand are right. You see, it's a single source, and I can go after it, either upstream or downstream. What happened with COVID? It was all over the place. It was upstream and it was downstream. So here we are, we're stuck, and we have no clue where to start dealing with this. And so micro level resilience, no matter how well we did it, had come short. Um, so that's essentially what, and then that's essentially what I have for micro. Then we go on to macro level resilience, and that's essentially just what we rely on. Here we are, we throw our hands up in the air saying, I can't do it, government help me, right? I can't do it. Mr. Industry-based association, come and help me, right? And this is basically the Hail Mary, right? You're asking for support, be it FEMA after the fact, or government stipend and whatnot that we're all presuming that is going to come, um, and the government to be able to assist. What are we finding with COVID is that it's literally impossible for the government to be able to handle this. And this is just not a US phenomenon, right? Around the world, right? Governments have had to actually forego shortchange many individuals, many businesses, just to be able to survive, right? Government has its own bills to pay, right? And to maintain police force, public health, etc. So macro level resilience also comes short. What have we done has been effective on the macro level resilience? Well, if you remember the oil embargo back in the 1970s, what happened from there? We got smart and we said, okay, we are going to have a strategic oil reserve. We don't want others to be influencing us, right? So U.S. still maintains a strategic reserve, and even it is, if everybody is paying close attention, it's going to last us no more than 60 or so days. We can survive 2 months. That's it. Now, this is old news because now we're self-sufficient, right? Because of fracking and whatnot, but things change, right? There are lots of political issues associated with fracking as well. Nevertheless, so this is an example of what the government does. There's also Responsible Care, or the American Chemistry Council, that has developed standard on protocols for industry members to follow. So these are industry-based associations, essentially preventatively saying this is what you should do so that you're prepared, right? But these also come short, right? Because industry-based associations are nothing more than a very, dare I say, myopic, short-sighted or limited perspective of the world. American Chemistry Council is a bunch of chemical companies that look at things the same way. It's simply not something that is beyond their ability. So that's essentially another example of a micro and macro level resilience. So so all of these can enhance supply network resilience by reducing exposure and recover for supply and demand disruptions. The left-hand side is essentially looking at climate change and the issues and ramifications that are coming about with regards to temperature climb and whatnot, whether you believe it or not, and what the causes are. The bottom line is that it is happening, and we have no idea the type of ramifications that it may have. The right-hand side is the global hunger crisis, which a lot of folks don't necessarily pay close attention. But I just want to bring that up because I do quite a bit of work on the humanitarian front with NGOs, non-governmental organizations. You realize that 1 out of 8 of the kids, our kids in this country, actually go hungry, right? And this is not an exaggeration, and this is not something to just set aside. We do have a hunger crisis in this country. Unfortunately, it is just getting sidestepped, right? And just imagine with COVID on top, the type of uh, uh, limitations and further enhancement that food banks and folks in that supply chain of humanitarian food relief had to deal with, right? And so these are the things that we are still cannot grapple with through micro and macro level resilience, right? The government can, it has a SNAP program, but the SNAP program has been around for a long time and hasn't solved the hunger crisis. So here we are. So what we call meso level resilience is essentially what I have for you today. Again, is a multi-organization collaboration structure that combines attributes of micro and macro level approaches so that we can manage short-term, medium-term, or even long-term supply risks in an adaptive and fluid manner. So we're bringing different colors, different perspectives, and we're threading them together, right? And so network resilience, it could be buyer supplier dyad, or it can be firms developing in many different supply networks, semi-open nature to more closed nature. And then macro level resilience is about firms belonging to different supply networks, um, and but providing broad safety nets. So you see the difference. Sorry about the this one is micro, the middle one is meso level, and then in the macro level. So this is our sandwich, right? This the top one, we know it comes short. The bottom one, unfortunately, is also comes short, as we've seen with COVID and presumably a larger size pandemics. So I was talking to a good colleague and says, "Oh, this is like the sandwich where you say, where's the beef? The beef is in the middle, right? Perhaps." I said, "No, no, 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 no. This is not a matter of saying that the one in the middle is the panacea. Rather, it's a complement. We need to really have all three. Nobody says that the top one or the bottom one is not important. It's just that there are shortcomings in this puzzle that we have, and perhaps the meso level resilience is able to help. Okay, so what are different examples of meso level resilience? Some of these is I'll just mention one in the interest of time, and that is the Sustainability Consortium. If anybody's familiar with this, Sustainability Consortium is actually, believe it or not, an initiative that is led by Walmart, and it brings in experts. I use that term. It brings in many different folks that presumably know their stuff, from different parts and different organizations on how organizations can limit their footprint, carbon footprint. The idea there is that you have the commitment and the perspective for looking at large ideas, large problems with a broad perspective. Same thing with Sustainable Coffee Challenge, same thing with New Plastics Economy, Global Commitment, and so broader perspective on that. Now, you notice much of these examples are coming from the area of sustainability. Why? Because sustainability is this sustained crisis that is there. It's like the 800-pound gorilla that's in the room, but we keep ignoring it. And so folks have been focusing on this, and I think it's time for us to leverage that, but to apply it to let's say, more immediate and hurtful disruptions. Let me go to the slides, so I think we have some questions or comments.
We definitely have questions that are coming in now, and if you recall, we received a number of questions in advance of the
Yeah, so
webinar as well.
let me just hop over because I think, I can always come back and give you examples of of this. But let's go to yeah, let's go to our questions and make this more fun for us.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. That sounds good. Let's start with some of the ones that came in advance. And thanks to all of our participants who were thoughtful enough to include those. I'll start with what impact would the access, oh wow. Let me read this first and then figure out how to sum it up. I'm going to go on to this other one while I try to figure out some spelling issues with that one, figure out what words they meant. Which sectors will recover first or last during the COVID economic recovery? And will travel ever be like it used to be?
Right. That's a very good question. Margaret, you mentioned that to me before. I think the sectors that are going to recover are the ones that we already see having quite a bit of health associated with them. Keep in mind that there are sectors in the economy that are quite well leveraging the opportunity. We are on Zoom right now. Guess what? That company is not hurting. Same thing with, I don't know if you followed, but Peloton, right? In terms of stock, Peloton is doing great. Now, the fascinating thing is the day when the announcement for vaccines came out, Peloton stock plummeted, right? So think of or a human behavior that is going to change once this pandemic is essentially gone. It is likely that folks are going to try and cautiously get out, right? And so the travel, the restaurant industry, much of the service, right, and leisure, I think they are just waiting, and I do think there's a pent-up demand. Um, and if you don't believe me, my one of my students last night, no, Monday night, she was from Singapore, and she was telling me how when they were kids, there was nothing but what did she say? Um, there was nothing but eating and shopping to do, right? And I said, well, gee, at this point here in the United States, even that's gone. You can't go to the mall and you can't go to the restaurant. So isn't that funny? That's one of the primary primary needs that we have as human beings, and I think those urges are going to be there. So let me answer this question in a nutshell by saying, if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of need, some people don't like it, but I like it. It's actually not too bad. And if you follow that pyramid, I believe it's going to go up in the same fashion. We're going to start from fresh. Anything that's missing from there is going to recover faster and eventually get to the top, right? The recovery is, I believe, that's going to be in that fashion. So we'll leave it at that, and then as we go, I can share more color into it.
Sure. Okay, so I sorted this out. It was just one word that was off, and so I'm going to go back to this question. What impact will the access to capital have on businesses needing to reinvest in their supply chains if commercial banks feel the economic recession will still impact loan credit quality and federal loan support programs are not available post-pandemic, resulting in a credit crunch? Maybe we should have roped Farouk in for this to answer
Yeah,
this question.
yeah, I'll do my best. Can you repeat the first part? What impact
Sure.
will?
The access to capital have on businesses needing to reinvest in their supply chains if commercial banks feel the economic recession will still impact loan credit quality and federal loan support programs are not available post-pandemic, resulting in a credit crunch?
I have a different opinion. I don't see the credit crunch. I don't see, but I will answer it the way you phrased it. But I just want you to see it as I see that this one is a very, very unique case where I see it as glass is half full rather than half empty, and so the credit crunch is could have an impact, but I do believe that there is adequate funds or capital globally to compensate for that. Remember, as with regards to firms and commercial lending, that's not the only source of funding that is available. And furthermore, I think commercial lenders are also in the same situation where they're looking to restart. You know, so that's number one. Interest rates are at the lowest that they can be. So as long as your organization or the organization is not in some type of trouble in terms of being able to get credit approval, I seriously don't think that's going to be an issue. I think the probably the bigger issue is simply having the demand there and how fast the consumers are going to be coming back.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like really good news.
Mhm.
So here's a question about space. Who thought that your talk would lead to a question about space, right? Are there opportunities within supply chain logistics and the advancements in the space sector combined together? And they use the use of lunar landers for space logistics as an example.
Okay, so this goes beyond COVID. It seems like on the application of space technology. Um, yeah, of course. We don't. I mean, somebody says, "Why did we go to space a while back?" And the answer was because we can, right? Um, and so the ramifications of being involved in that particular industry is something fascinatingly unknown. We are exploring the unknown. And I did my thesis in product development and innovation, right? And sometimes we just innovate, not knowing necessarily what's going to come out of it and whether it's going to stick or not. I mean, it's the Elon Musk theory, right? Right? He didn't know PayPal's going to hit. He didn't know Tesla is going to be a hit. And speaking of space, he's one that is throwing rockets up, and he failed, right? But he carried on, and now he's got a contract with the government. So from a business standpoint and from a product development standpoint, it certainly has an impact. From a supply chain standpoint, I think the space industry is very unique. I used to work at New Mexico State University, and actually I'm somewhat aware of the supply chain of the space industry. It's very unique. And there are fascinating players there. Um, but I think in terms of delivery, um, and in terms of logistics, I think the challenges associated with the space can be used as a model uh, for others to consider on the way the problems are solved. So the impact, I can't tell you exactly the impact, other than just like any other fairly new industry, we're going to learn from them and perhaps develop new ideas that could be implemented.
Fascinating. So, I think there's a whole other webinar in the works on your work in space, and that I'm tying New Mexico to Area 51.
Mhm.
So I think we have a whole nother webinar to talk about that.
Right, that's
Um,
great. It's a good thing we're doing this on Zoom and not actually at Area 51, but
okay, so a couple of questions that came in today. How deeply should you vet your supply chain partners in terms of them vetting their supply chain partners? You know, how far does it go?
that's a great question. I see it's from Ralph. Um, I think the closer you are to the end consumer, the more important it becomes for you to vet, meaning validate and double check um, um, what's going on upstream, right? The further upstream you go, right, it becomes important as well. But I do think the downstream members, consumer-facing members, the J&Js of the world, the General Motors of the world, are more at risk. The deeper the better, right? But Ralph, let me just answer the question by saying this. Not all suppliers are created equal. God created all men equal, men and women, of course, but God did not create all suppliers equal, right? And so we got to be very careful about which suppliers we're paying close attention, because we can be wasting a lot of time, looking into vetting suppliers that really are just not that critical for us.
Gotcha. That's good to think about it that way. Here's a great question. How do you train resilience in people that have never been through a crisis?
Very good question. I like that a lot. Yeah. So you have let's say you have a young work group or folks that may not have been in your industry, have shifted industry, and they're just not sensitive enough to what is going on. Right? I mean, we were ostriches when COVID hit, right? Probably the biggest criticism was the reaction, the delayed reaction that we had in this country. So how do we avoid the delayed reaction, and how do we enhance the sensitivity of individuals? You really have to make sure that they are aware, right? And that becomes simply by placing them in a position. This is no different than safe driving, right? How do you make teenagers, excuse me, right, high schoolers drive safe, right, and don't drink and drive? Well, you literally give them lots of videos, right? Dare I say, okay, so I'm a dad, so I'm going to go off on a limb and say, even if it's gory videos, right, perhaps it's necessary to do so, just to make sure that they recognize the importance of it. Because unfortunately, and it doesn't have anything to do with youth or age. Unfortunately, we human beings have a very, very short memory of things. And after a little while, we forget. And that's why repetitiveness is important. So start, train, and then carry on training. And hopefully that will raise some sensitivity to it.
Very good. We may have to close with this question, but I think it's a very good one. And it seems to be about the importance of redundancy. So the question is, how many supply chain partners should you have in a specific category? Do you go first, second, third? Is exclusive partnership a bad thing? So forth.
That's an excellent question. This is essentially what we cover in my class in procurement. This is procurement. One of the fundamentals of procurement is, how many suppliers should I have? And it really depends, again, on the type of supplier and the type of relationship with the supplier, and also the type of item that I'm purchasing. Let's put it this way: if I'm very concerned about making sure that I don't run out of microchips. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, right? Brand new information, fascinating information, right? Which I haven't had a chance to look into yet. But apparently the car industry is really hurting for production right now. And the reason for that is that they did not put any order in for chips because they thought their demand is going to go down, and now they're predicting the demand to go up. But the chip manufacturers, we're talking about the Qualcomms of the world, and you name it, have shifted direction, right? It's just simply not paying attention to a good friend, right? And them spending more time with somebody else, and then you're coming back and saying, oh, can I get a reservation to spend time with you? And he or she's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm booked for a little while. So, that's essentially one way to look at it is, number one, you want to make sure that you maintain your relationship with your suppliers in good times or bad times. Number two is that, if you're very concerned about the potential of that supplier moving on or finding better customers, then you do as what we call multi-sourcing. On the other hand, there is benefits to single sourcing, and that is that you can develop deep relationships, right? And so if you find the right supplier, that you think can actually stay and quote unquote loyally, then perhaps there's no reason to go elsewhere. You can actually enhance both of your capabilities. Third is, like I mentioned to Ralph, is again the type of product. I'm sorry, the type of component or supply that we're dealing with. Example, if you're looking for bumpers and you're an automotive manufacturer, or if you're looking for bland packaging as a pharmaceutical company, right? Those are the ones that you can find suppliers pretty easily. So one would really be wasting time in trying to have ongoing contract with a multitude of them, right? You just go with one, use your scale economy, and then if the supplier doesn't deliver, you make a phone call, and in a couple of weeks, hopefully, you're going to have a replacement. So in those cases, less is more.
Very good. Well, this has been very interesting. And Arash, we did have a couple of questions that we didn't get to. I'll share those with you afterward, so that we can I can just get to our quick closing remarks. First, I wasn't sure if you wanted to show your citations, if that was necessary, but you certainly
I
can.
could just, yeah, I'll just put them up there.
Yeah, you can if you want to do that while I'm talking about this. But I wanted to thank you so much for your time and your fantastic presentation. It was one of Dean Lay's 4 Rs. Resilience was obviously prominently featured, and it was really informative and gave our audience a lot to ponder on the impact of disruption on our, quite frankly, our vital supply chain. So. I want to thank our audience. They certainly enhanced the discussion with enthusiastic participation, both in advance with questions, during Q&A, and a little bit in chat. If anyone listening would like to learn more from Arash, keep in mind that he's a member of the program faculty for the forthcoming mini MBA Digital Supply Chain Management. More information can be found in the executive education section of our website, and I'll read that out since it's pretty quick: business.rutgers.edu/EE, and that would be obviously for executive education. And a friendly reminder to everyone listening that the RBS Virtual Lunch and Learn series takes place on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Time. For 2021, we're generally aiming for the third Wednesday of each month, though I will tell you to always look at the schedule, just in case some of our presenters have limited availability. That does not necessarily include the third Wednesday. For more information, you can always visit our webpage. I'm going to read it out, but I will let the people know who are our regulars that you'll receive this via email as well: business.rutgers.edu/alumni/lifelong-learning. And we have an exciting schedule of topics and presenters that are lined up over the next several months, all thanks to great suggestions from our audience. And we encourage you to keep sharing those ideas with us so the series continues to meet your needs. And we ask that you please stay online for just a moment longer when today's webinar closes, because you'll immediately see a very brief 3-question survey about today's event, and one of them is a free-form field to type in topics and/or speakers you'd like to see featured in the future. And lastly, just as we hit the top of the hour here, I mentioned when we began that a link to the archive recording of this presentation will be shared via social media and emailed to all of those who are registered, and it'll also appear on the Business Insights page of our website. Arash, I thank you so much. Our audience, thank you, and I wish everyone a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here. And thank
Bye.
you, Margaret.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.